Hi everyone, this is Emily and I am a digital transformation consultant at Hyperbots. Today I am very pleased to have Niyati on the call with me, who is the co-founder and VP of AI at Hyperbots. So today we'll be talking about invoices, their peculiarities and the different nuances. Specifically, why is it not so trivial for AI to understand them? So Niyati, let's start with the basics. What makes invoices peculiar?
First, thanks. It's always great to be talking to you. Let's. What is an invoice? An invoice actually is the main document or the mode of communication for any accounts payable process or AP process. So these invoices contain information about what payment needs to be done between a vendor and a company. It will have information about addresses, their identities, the goods or the receipts or the goods and services that are being invoiced for, and obviously the amounts and information about it.
So that's quite a lot of information, right? All of this is usually put in a single format, so it's all very structured and the invoices look the same, correct?
No, not really. In fact, invoice by nature is unstructured. What that means is every vendor may have their own way of representing an invoice. It's not only the way it is laid out on a page or multiple pages, it is also the format in which it may be communicated. Sometimes it's via email, sometimes it's a scan, sometimes it's a PDF, sometimes it may be an Excel sheet. So, invoice by definition doesn't have to follow a structure as long as it communicates the information about what payment needs to be done and what are the services or the goods that are being transacted upon.
So then this would also vary across the industries, correct? Can you help me with an example for that?
Sure. So let's take an example of a software company, and they are maybe renting an office. So their invoice between the office or the vendor and that software company will be just about the number of seats, maybe the recurring cost of the infrastructure and stuff like that. Some other invoices these guys may have maybe around actual laptops that they have kind of taken up. But they are never going to have invoices which talk about transportation cost. The reason I mentioned transportation cost here is, on the other hand, if I talk about a manufacturing firm who's trying to build, let's say, a machine, all their vendors or a large amount of their vendors will be people who are actually transporting different parts of things that make the machine. So their invoice will have things like cost and the weight of those goods, the actual charge for transportation and other associated costs. So just because of the nature of a service or the goal of an organization, because that differs from industry to industry, the nature of the invoice will differ significantly from an industry to another one.
Got it. So industry verticals have a huge impact, it seems like. Can you help explain the part of the invoice that contains the actual amounts and item details? What is challenging there?
That's a great question. In fact, line items or the part of an invoice that covers information about what is invoiced for is a core to that invoice, because that is actually saying, okay, hi, I gave you 100 apples at this rate and this is the cost for it. Now, a line item again is something which will say, which will define things like the exact, maybe a product code. So let's say a electric bulb manufacturer will have 3 bulbs they are offering. That line item defines what is the right code which was actually delivered. It will also talk about things like, let's say, a labor charge, right? So if I have a service invoice or an invoice created between people because of the services an individual gave, that line item may just say something like service provided by person X at the rate Y for 30 hours a week. And the reader or the accountant, and in the case of automation, the AI needs to understand that, okay, hey, the unit price is different for different kinds of line items, the actual net amount is different, taxation is different, or discounts are different. And that table or a tabular format of all the line items will define what is the final amount or the transaction being done across the different companies and the enterprises.
So let's say an invoice has a table. It will just have one table, right? Can't we build models to understand that one table?
It can have as many tables as they want, right? So, like I said earlier, an invoice can be anything. So, as a company, I may decide that I want the basic goods that I sent to be represented in one table, the additional charge on top of it, let's say fuel, in another table, my actual invoice ID or identity information of the vendor in the third table. As against that, someone else will say, hello, I'll put all of that in a single table, or I will put information about the vendor just as text, information about the items in a table, and information about the fuel charge or the extra charge as a subscript. So there is, no one is going to say put only one table in that document. It can be as many as you want.
So, if I have to summarize the industry, the format of the document, the way the line items are laid out, all of it makes the invoice fairly complex for AI to interpret, right?
Yeah. So that actually what you just said defines what an invoice is, right? So it is technically a semi-structured business document which has a combination of well-written language as well as these codes and numbers put in one place.
What about the stuff that's written in small subscript in the invoices? Is that of any importance, and can AI model make sense out of that?
Is that of any importance? Yes. So if like all of us, sometimes we go and sign something online or somewhere without reading the subscript, and we then later on realize that we are being charged a monthly cost on our credit cards or something like that, right? Because of some small consent we gave to some website or some subscript that we did not read. Similarly, in an invoice, this subscript actually talks about payments, penalties, discounts, how the payment should be done, what are the terms and conditions that have already been agreed upon, and nuances of an agreement either pre-done or as defined on the document right there. Now, is it something AI can understand? It's hard. It's actually something one needs to build specialized AI models for. And the reason it is so is multifold, right? One is its subscript. So like any human, AI cannot understand very tiny letters, or OCR cannot understand tiny letters on a piece of image. So you need to have enhanced extraction capability for your AI pipeline. That's like basic, like your AI needs to be able to first read what is there. Then comes AI needs to be able to interpret it. So if that payment instruction or payment term is says that some penalty applied if not paid by due date and with a compound interest of something monthly, it has to be codified to say that hello, pay by due date, which is another part of the invoice. Continue, then figure out what is the recurring rate, what is the actual penalty, and what will be the actual cash outflow. So a lot of reasoning and understanding goes in there when you start looking at those subscripts.
So I understand the part about the discount and penalty, but isn't text extraction from invoices or documents something that OCR solves?
That's a great question. So OCR does it to an extent. OCR is a technology that has existed, has had commercial solutions like you're saying, but it's not adapted to this notion of it may be a crumpled paper someone scanned. It's not adapted to a notion of that OCR text written on that piece of on a page or whatever, a digital page, is some table which you cannot read from left to right. You may have vertical. There are invoices where the invoice ID is written in the vertical way, not in a horizontal reading order. Just like humans, that machine kind of needs to tilt its head and figure it out, right? Your standard OCR doesn't do that. So it's still, there's a small delta to ensure that it is usable. It works for a lot of things, but it still doesn't necessarily work for everything that the finance or the AP process sees.
I wasn't aware that so many practical challenges are involved. It looks like even just to read an invoice correctly, you'd need an expert.
Yeah, that's what like the coolest thing about all of this is.
So, out of curiosity, Niyati, let's say I have some fancy, cool AI that is able to solve for all the problems that you just mentioned. Then invoice understanding is easy, right?
There is still a little bit of, say, a finance think head, or someone needs to think like an accountant in order to understand what's written in that invoice. And I know what I just said sounds like a fantasy fairy tale. So let me give you an example of what I mean. So let's say I present an invoice to a layman. which is equivalent to presenting it to an AI which does not understand an invoice, right? So let's assume AI or software is developed enough to reach a point that it understands basic English. It will understand dates. We can probably understand, okay, there are line items, there are amounts, there are addresses, all of that seems interpretable. Now let's say on that invoice there is a particular piece of text which reads something like 1% 10 and 30. Now to a layman, or probably even to you, it may not make sense. What is it? It looks like a code. It may be a code referring to some particular object. But into an accountant, that's not the case. So in fact, what I just said, 1%, 10 and 30, means if you pay the invoice in the next 10 days, which is in the 10 days after it has been invoiced or the invoice date, 1% discount is applicable. But irrespective of whether you do that or not, the invoice is due in 30 days. So your due date, actually, whether it's written on the invoice or not, is a month from the invoice date, because that term N30 is on the invoice. An accountant or an AP expert will understand that. Similarly, AI needs to be able to interpret all of this. So one needs to build specialized domain expertise in the AI while training it, so that it can do these kind of interpretations and inference.
Got it. So after listening to you describe all the challenges, I think it's quite overwhelming. At the same time, it would be really exciting to see AI solve for these problems and solve these nuances for the finance team.
That's exactly kind of what I do as a daily job, right? And if I look at it from a technology growth perspective, we as in the AI or software automation abilities finally at a point that if we start building specialized models, obviously it needs thinking out of the box and figuring out a lot of experimentation, lot of intelligent way of putting out the product. All of those things are needed. But if we do it right, we can kind of nail this problem and solve a lot of concerns, save time, save money, all of that for the CFOs out there.
Got it. Thank you so much, Niyati. It was wonderful chatting to you and looking at your excitement. So thank you so much.